interests me is, as I say, most of all, is getting me feeling good about what I've done, and me and the people that I work with feeling good about what I've done.
Tony Scott, the British-born director of Top Gun and other Hollywood blockbusters, has jumped to his death from a bridge.
Just his passion, his energy, his shorts, that pink hat, his passion.
And I think as a director, making a movie is about falling in love with a movie.
Was the younger brother of fellow director Ridley Scott. He was 68 years old.
Born in North Shields, Northumberland, England, to parents Jean and Colonel Francis Perry Scott, Tony's the brother of film director Ridley Scott, the youngest of 3 boys. Struggling as a painter after art school, future directors Tony and Ridley formed an advertising agency to leverage their artistic talent, and there they began to shoot commercials. Tony's feature film debut, 1971's Loving Memory, was a sad and poignant drama about a couple coping with a vehicular homicide. It would be 12 more years before he made his next feature, 1983's The Hunger, a taut and sexy vampire film with a star-studded cast that included David Bowie and Susan Sarandon. Hollywood noticed Scott's talent, and he was asked to helm one of the biggest monster hits of the decade, 1986's Top Gun, a film that caused noticeable spikes in U.S. Navy recruitment and sales of volleyball nets, and a decline in the sale of shirts. Who better to take over for Beverly Hills Cop franchise after Beverly Hills Cop 1 director Martin Brest took a few years off between smash hits? Scott kept the franchise going long enough for Jonathan Landis to ruin it in 1994 and follow up BHC Deuce with 1990's Kevin Costner thriller Revenge, which did okay, but had nothing on his other 1990 project, the 2-hour NASCAR love letter Days of Thunder, where he reunited with Tom Cruise in the role of a lifetime as Maverick, but cars this time. Not done amping up the adrenaline to 11, 1991 gave us the Shane Black pen The Last Boy Scout, which helped Bruce Willis get the taste of Hudson Hawk out of his mouth. Who better to direct Quentin Tarantino's first feature film in 1993? Tony Scott had the Midas touch, and he did what he could, making the budget a true romance back in the US alone and launching Tarantino's stellar career. Military films still excited Scott, and he came back in 1995 with a tense and claustrophobic thriller about a submarine mutiny called Crimson Tide. Not releasing the tension at all, Scott followed up the next year with The Fan, a dark and sobering cautionary tale about fandom bordering on obsession. 1998's Enemy of the State kept tension high as Scott reunited with Gene Hackman to scare us by showing how good government surveillance technology was. But don't worry, it's assuredly much better now 20 years later. On an espionage kick, Scott followed up with 2001's Spy Game, which probably would have chosen not to come out 7 weeks after 9/11 if it had to do it all over again. Deciding it wouldn't be fair to either of them to make a movie without Denzel Washington ever again, Scott made 2004's Man on Fire, 2006's Deja Vu, 2009's The Taking of Pelham 123, and 2010's Unstoppable, pausing only in 2005 to make a Richard Kelly film called Domino, which was bad, but luckily no one saw it. No follow-up was forthcoming, though, as Scott tragically took his own life in 2012. He left behind a stellar resume, some of the most America films of all time, and some real thrilling fare as well. His tendency to get films made for other people and for studios didn't go unnoticed throughout the balance of his tenure, and his absence is felt with a Top Gun sequel on the way any day now.
A true action auteur taken from family and friends way too soon, English director Tony Scott has trailblazed the way for filmmakers like David Fincher, Michael Bay, Catherine Bigelow, and so many more. Welcome to this episode of Director's Cut. I'm your host, Jon Dunning, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Mr. Jason Alt.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming back.
Absolutely, sir. Tony Scott we're talking about today, and who better to bring on the cast than the man from Action Industries, the movie trivia schmodown Collider, Mr. Ben Bateman. Thank you again for coming back, sir.
Yeah, of course. What's going on, guys? How you doing? I have a huge affection for Tony Scott. He's probably that director that I love more than I should, and I have covered a lot of his movies on my shows. I've tried to convince people of the virtues of his worst movies, and I can't wait to talk to you today about my favorites. So this is exciting to come on. I got to come on for Michael Mann last time, and Tony Scott's another one near and dear to my heart.
The first time I asked you to be a guest on the show, I said, Who do you want to talk about? You know, you're definitely a man that talks about a lot of movies with all your projects going on, and right away it wasn't even like a hesitation. You said Tony Scott.
Yeah, man. I mean, he's that unique breed of director, especially in the action genre, where there's like true great action directors, right? Like Michael Bay is a great action director, not because he directs action well or that his movies are that good. It's just like he understands that genre. That's what he wants to make. So if you want to watch a big movie that's got a lot of crazy stuff going on, Michael Bay is your guy, right? Directors have their strengths. And I think Tony Scott never quite got the respect he deserved. I think Ridley Scott gets a lot of respect, but Tony Scott always felt like he was sort of that above average director, and his movies never were that good in people's opinions. He had 2 or 3 that were really loved, and for the most part, he became sort of a journeyman. But if you look at his body of work, he really did make a lot of movies with very memorable moments and specifically style. He had a style, and it really became clear in the back half of his career that this guy knew exactly what he was doing, and he was making movies just how he wanted to make them.
He was a guy that Hollywood trusted for the most part, and while it seemed like a mishmash of like other people's influences early in his career, and he sort of hit his stride at the end. Early in his career, he was a guy that Hollywood was like, we got to get this done. How do we get this made? Who do we trust? And he was a guy they would bring in. Like, who do you bring in to take over Beverly Hills Cop? Why not Tony Scott?
Right.
You know, Top Gun. Why not Tony Scott? So it's good to be somebody that studios trust with, $100 million.
While we discuss and dive into this man's career, I'm going to channel my inner Robert Redford, and I grabbed a 12-year-old Scotch. This is the Belvini. Very nice. I'm going Spy Games tonight. Jason, you got a special guest tonight?
Beer in a can from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Founders Brewing. I have Green Zebra, which is their watermelon and sea salt goes style. It's fantastic. I buy it by the case. And I'm going to put a couple in my face tonight talking about Tony Scott.
Perfect. L'chaim. So Tony Scott's early career, let's kind of start from the beginning. His career in commercials, his feature debut, and not his short film, because I think this was another one that Jason was talking to me about off air, but The Hunger definitely had a pronounced artistic and abstract style. Why do you guys think that there was a major shift from being this kind of like I said, abstract artist, basically doing these type of commercials in these type of films, to what would become his signature style or signature genre, and that would be action?
I would have to say that there's a couple things going on. Remember that his brother Ridley was working at the same time, and at the time that Tony really got into feature film making, at that point Ridley had already made Alien and Blade Runner, so there was a real expectation for him to do something big, and I think his brother and the association there was going to help him get some jobs. I don't know why Top Gun, really. It's such a particular genre of action movie, but maybe that was just sort of the way it worked out. Luckily, that's the movie that he got, because I do think that helped propel him into the second part. But it's funny because like that stuff in the early part of his career, that, for lack of a better pun, that hunger to make that type of content evaporated very quickly.
And it's a hell of a cast to start out with, too. You got David Bowie, Susan Sarandon. It is definitely different from anything else. It was kind of like watching Michael. Wasn't it Michael Mann that his first film was a horror film, like in The Keep?
It's later. It's like middle, but yeah, it's like his second or third. He has right. Thief, and then The Keep is right in there. Yeah,
it felt very much like his version of The Keep, and I liked that he kind of not kissed a whole lot of frogs, but at least dipped his toe into other things. And just watching some interviews with Scott, he was saying how a lot of the British filmmakers were coming over, his brother included, with this very pronounced art style, and that wasn't really what the American audience was kind of pandering for at the moment. So I feel like he shifted a little bit, but I'm glad that even though he did switch his genre, he did kind of keep that, like you said, Ben, that artistic kind of feel for a genre that felt very flat. The American action scene at the time felt very, it was shot flat. Everything looked kind of boring and washed out, where a Scott film, whether some say over editing or not, it's definitely has that color grading to it, that signature, just more oomph artistically.
And it feels like The Hunger was the movie where he proved himself to Hollywood. They're kind of like, hey, we like what your brother's up to, but what do you got? And The Hunger didn't need to be good. It just needed to be competent. He needed to follow directions, and he needed to sort of, prove that he could take someone's script and produce a film. Because before that, he hadn't really made any features besides the thing he made himself, Loving Memory in 1971, which is just this weird film about this couple that like hits a bicyclist and then they take him home and dress him up in their dead son's clothes. Just like, it's like, yeah, you went to art school, like I can tell. And it doesn't really jive with the rest of what he did. So he just did commercial work for like 12 years before that. And then, finally, I don't know if his brother got him the job or if, he just wanted to prove himself. But I think once he made The Hunger competently, for whatever reason, someone had the balls to like, all right, here's a $25 million Air Force jet. Go to town.
Yeah, it's rare. I mean, it's like most directors aren't going to make Reservoir Dogs as their first feature. Very often, if you look at like the great artists who really have a vision, the best you're going to get is something like Hard Eight by P.T. Anderson, where it's competent, just like you said, Jason. It's kind of what you have to do is you go in, they give you a cast, they give you the tools, and as long as the movie's not awful, as long as it has its moments, you're happy. You look at Christopher Nolan making Following, or any of these guys, really. I mean, even David Fincher, making Alien 3, which is fine. It's just very rarely do you get a classic as your first movie, and so I don't think I think The Hunger is fine, but also it's not suited to the genre that he became famous for. So it makes sense that it doesn't feel quite as polished as a very polished film in his next.
Hey, quit typing the comment. I know that Top Gun was Navy jets.
And let's talk about Top Gun real quick, because this film in particular it seems like it's become, you've used it as kind of a totem for your whole movie career, Ben. It looks like you use this as a sigil for kind of what you're about. What about that film just completely spoke to you? Did you find it as like a child, and is that where it kind of clicked? Did that spark love for movies for the rest of your life, or did you find it kind of later in life and you're just like, wow, this is kind of special?
It's funny you say it, actually. So Cruise is my guy. That's the first thing you're referring to. A lot of people know that. Like, a lot of the shows, TC Legend is my guy. But Top Gun has never been my favorite movie. I like the soundtrack to Top Gun more than I like the movie Top Gun. There's a lot of parts in Top Gun. There's a lot of parts in Top Gun that are sweet. And if you go back and you watch Top Gun with some like you want to laugh, you want some humor, it's great. But it's not a very good movie. I've never, like, Point Break is the action movie that got me going. Point Break's my favorite movie of all time, or close to it at this point. And that was the movie I remember like watching when I was growing up that like got me really into the sort of dumb action movie genre where you could really appreciate the finer points. And Top Gun has some of that, but there's also a lot of Top Gun that's absolutely horrible. Some of the acting is awful, but it is classic, and it represents this part of American film history that is so specific. I'm always shocked when I talk to people and they talk about Top Gun as though it's a great classic film. Like, they talk about it as though it's great in the way that like classic great movies are great. Like, Top Gun's campy and fun. It's not.
It's important though. It's important in the
very
in the zeitgeist. Sure, right. Like that movie got so many Americans erections that they had to set up Navy recruiting stations in the theaters for that movie. Like,
right.
It's like a can of Budweiser exploding into fireworks. It's so Murica, that movie, that it doesn't matter how effective it is. It's more evocative. Like, the film didn't have to be that competent, because of what it represented. It was the cool summer movie of the mid 80s. It got everybody's blood pumping. Everybody liked it. It was just quotable enough, it had some cool shit. And Val Kilmer was in it, and he's awesome. And then, it was like the first affordable VHS tape. I think this gets kind of lost in the shuffle. VHS tapes were so unaffordable back then because the movie studios didn't want people to stay home. They wanted them to go to the theater. And they didn't want them to have, like, you could rent it at Blockbuster, but you couldn't buy it. And back then, a VHS was like $49 or something stupid like that. I think Top Gun was like $25, which is still a lot of $1986. But still, it was like a half-price VHS tape. And that was like the movie where people started their home video collections. But it's like after Top Gun, that sort of shifted to like the whole like, oh, we have movies now. So a lot of people had that VHS just because that was like the first one people could afford, and everybody had it, so everybody watched it a lot because they didn't have a ton of tapes.
I think if you look at moments in film history that were significant, there's usually more than one factor. And Tony Scott's career can largely be accredited to the fact that he directed the greatest movie star of our generation in his breakout movie star role. Like, Risky Business is the role, but it's Top Gun that made him a worldwide phenomenon. And some people kind of forget that, like, in '86 when that movie came out, some people had watched Risky Business, and he's a star in Risky Business, but in a completely different kind of way. I think if you put any director, if Joel Schumacher was to have directed Top Gun, I think it has a massive effect on anybody, just because, like him or hate him, respect him or not, even if you think he's talented or not, Tom Cruise is singular. There is only one. There only has ever been one. And he's outlasted all the rest of them.
He's like a Tom Hanks, yeah.
Right, his cruisiness is exemplified in only a few movies as much as that. It's like that version of him, the action star, confident, the character of Maverick, is like, that's that movie, and that's that role, and that's the defining version of him. Otherwise it's like Jerry Maguire is a different kind of cruisy cruise. There's like a few of them, but Top Gun is like stands at the top of the mountain of sort of that version of a movie star. It's like a parody of it almost.
Sure, and it was so effective as a character. He got to play Car Maverick 4 years later.
Right.
Yeah. In that 2-hour Mellow Yellow commercial called Days of Thunder.
They really tried to recreate that magic, didn't they? It made me call back to, Jason, when you were saying the price of VHSs back then, but I remember being so enthralled with seeing Top Gun as a child that I begged and screamed for the Top Gun NES game, which was $60 back then. Remember paying $60 for these little pieces of plastic that would melt in this toaster that was the original NES. But I mean, and you can never land that jet on the aircraft carrier.
The Power Glove, that's the secret.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's so bad,
smashing it against the thing. But the thing about Top Gun, and watching it now as a jaded adult, again, I mean, it's been more than 2 decades since I viewed Top Gun, but I rewatched it in prep for this, and it just was so much fun, and it's so easy for people like us that watch a lot of films to pick it apart, of course, with a scalpel, right? Because it's just like, oh my God, some of it is just makes your face so hot because it's just so cringeworthy. But the things that hold up in that are the actual action, and it's just so good and so underrated. And I have yet to see like a jet dogfight kind of film like that is its equal. I think that he showed in his second film that he is not only a great action sequence director, but also a tension builder. I think he was very much underrated as a tension builder.
Well, I think that kind of defines his whole catalog, really. He loved tense movies. If you look at like the sequence of movies he did where he made, like Crimson Tide, The Fan, Enemy of the State, Spy Game, like all right in a row, I think he was really just putting the thumb screws to everybody. Yeah,
he's definitely a guy that loved that. He absolutely loved that, and I think some of his sort of, it works well in Top Gun, but he borrows some of the techniques that work well in Top Gun, and he starts to lend them to later films in ways that are a little less overt. And I'm excited to talk about that as we get past, because as you mentioned, Top Gun's a lot of fun, but it's mostly that. That's mostly what that movie is. It has, as you mentioned, some cringeworthy stuff. I just don't want to know I'm falling for you, Maverick. Like, she's bad. Yeah. She's really bad.
Well, she never really acted again. So thanks for that.
Exactly.
Well, Tony Scott said, "I'm a plagiarist. I always look back at other movies and I steal, but I steal well and I reinvent." And Top Gun and Days of Thunder felt very much like he was doing an impression of Jerry Bruckheimer.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
And the utilization of a score, I'll say that with a asterisk, I guess, because he just basically if it's an action scene, we're getting Danger Zone. If it's a love scene, we're getting the other one. And
Take My Breath Away by Berlin, you mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
Good one.
Get
Real
your shit
good
together.
And I know, right? What am I doing? Amateur hour over here. But
don't forget Playing with the Boys by Kenny Loggins. That's the other classic.
Sure. But that was something that I don't recall being utilized that often, was just taking certain themes and then just reusing it, but using that as more, elevating it more from just music, a backdrop, as a storytelling device. His action scenes seem so like they had more weight to them than like a Michael Bay, is because he took the time to flesh out his characters, almost to a fault. Sometimes we get some weird character moments, like in Days of Thunder, the whole the introduction to Nicole Kidman's doctor, and then we had to have Robert Duvall go in and explain why she just got sexually molested or assaulted. Basically, they could cut a lot of that out, but like I said, they characterized and he fleshed out his characters. Like he did it so much to then when shit hit the fan. That's why we cared about the action sequences, because we got to know these people, and then the peril kind of seems weighted. It's not just random red shirts all the time hitting the floor.
Sure. I mean, I will tell you, there's scenes in the little later part of the catalog that I look forward to talking about, because that stuff you're talking about, I always say this in action movies, and Drew and I have said this on our show forever, but I like the moments between the action and action movies more than I like the action. I don't actually like action in action movies very much, usually. If it's done amazingly, it'll get me more, but often it's just sensory overload. You burn out. But if you have great characters and you have those great moments where directors really go for it, they try to give you like a little moment in the movie, those tend to be when the movies land for me better, and the later part of his catalog has a lot of that. So what you're talking about of him really going for it with character is something he's been trying to do forever, and it works sometimes better than others.
He was very aware of what he was doing. In an interview, he said, "My stories are pretty simplistic, but the characters are always complex and always right. And that comes from the script and my research and reverse engineering what I find in the real world." So even if the story is kind of like, all right, man flies plane or whatever, he thinks the scenes hinge on the characters. And I think that's something we all picked up on. Another thing, John, what you were mentioning with the themes for different people, that's like, I think the word for that might be a motif.
Sure.
And I feel like directors who trained as painters for whatever reason do that well. And he went to art school and trained as a painter. And I think a couple of the other directors that we talked about on the show also do motif well. And I think that might be just cross-pollination with another genre of art. They sort of get the training to, to signal things like that. And I just thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I think there are these moments that he goes for in his movies, and the ones that I'm the most known for talking about are in the Denzel films, because the stuff that I'm the most interested in talking about, that's where I really developed my love for Tony Scott, is the earlier part of his career. I mean, I have love for other movies on the list. Like, I've seen 80% of his movies, I'd say. Sure. And some of them have, like, I've seen Top Gun a lot of times. I've definitely seen Days of Thunder and Enemy of the State a lot, Spy Game. But it's that stuff with Denzel, because it's something about where he learned. It's almost like he was his muse in this very particular way. Mm-hmm. He exemplified what Scott liked to do with his characters better than anyone.
True Romance to me felt definitely like that's a big Scott movie, and that's one that also doesn't feel like it belongs. Like, it feels like an outlier when you look at the rest of the filmography. And at first, like, the first time I watched True Romance, it almost felt like we just talked about Spike Jonze and Charlie Kaufman, and it felt kind of like that, where it was just like Tony was being the camera pointer, but it was very much a Quentin Tarantino film. But listening to interviews, especially post-mortem from Quentin Tarantino, him referencing the things that Tony Scott actually brought that went very off script. He didn't mess with the words on the page, so to speak.
Yeah, he literally said, "There's one great script that hit my desk that I didn't change at all, and that was True Romance."
Quentin is a very rare animal. Yeah. That what he does, he brings a reality to these people with a sense of humor, and it's very difficult to find a writer who can give you darkness and humor together. You either get one or the other. There's very few writers in the world today who have that ability to give you both things at once.
Scott did this thing, interestingly, where he would pick scripts, and for whatever reason, it took him longer than you would have expected to really have a style. Like, it didn't take him like 2 movies. It took him like 10. It took him like 8 or 9 movies, And so when you watch True Romance, it feels as much like a Quentin Tarantino film as The Last Boy Scout feels like a Shane Black film.
Absolutely.
They have this particular style, And the difference between his version of True Romance and Quentin Tarantino's version is that it doesn't have all the tongue-in-cheek winking at the audience stuff that a Tarantino movie would have, which in some ways makes it more approachable, and in some ways makes it a better movie to the masses than some Tarantino films are. You know, in some ways, the only Tarantino film I've never watched, or at least not all the way through, because it's on my 100 movies I missed project, is The Hateful Eight. I'm halfway through that movie. And I'm finding myself annoyed to tears by a lot of things that are happening in it, because it's just like, this is somebody who thinks their words are so brilliant and are so great that they are willing to have this white character drop the N-bomb 70 times in the first hour of the film for the sake of art. And it's stuff like that where I'm just like, I know you're a great writer, but when you make your own movies, you don't have the ability to edit yourself. You choose to make a 3-hour movie here. Whereas True Romance is a really good movie. That movie's really watchable. It's really fun. And I think that in some ways, while Pulp Fiction's a great success and one of the greatest films ever made, that's sort of where everything lines up and works for Tarantino. If he makes True Romance the year before, I don't know. I don't know if it's anywhere near as good as the Scott version. There's something about it being a very Hollywood movie that makes that movie great. And Tarantino doesn't make big Hollywood movies.
He made Hollywood choices that Tarantino never would have, because Tarantino's got his people that he uses.
Right.
Like, Tarantino never would have used Christian Slater.
No, and he's great, and he's great as like that early '90s leading man. Yeah, I love that movie. That movie's freaking great. The obvious famous scene with Walken and Hopper is one of like the legendary scenes, and Oldman's character of Drexel is unbelievable, and yeah, that movie's Gandolfini. R.I.P.
Mentioning that Hopper and Walken scene, that was another Tony Scott addition. Not again the words on the page. However, those two were having so much fun playing off each other that it turned quite comedic on set, and they were laughing quite a bit. So Tarantino said there was no humor in that scene initially. It was just a pressure cooker. You know, you have these two heavyweights. It was very similar to like Heat when De Niro and Pacino in the diner. You had Walken and Hopper just kind of going toe to toe, and it just became very funny to them, and so he left a lot. So he liked that tone, and Tarantino said that scene was a million times better than what he initially wrote or created in his head because of Tony Scott's addition of humor to the scene.
Interesting.
Well, I think that was just him letting the actors act, because it probably wasn't funny at first. It was probably very tense, and then it got so tense that they had to relieve the tension just as actors, you know, in between takes and stuff like that. And then that bled into it a little bit. And instead of being like, no, get serious, he let them go. And I think that's as much to his credit as anything else he's tried.
And that film is no less like brutal, vulgar, or even, you know, tastefully gratuitous. And I think that's kind of a term that I thought about a lot while watching a Tony Scott film. A lot of these other kind of action trashy directors, and that's not, you know, a fair term, but kind of stick with me. They go for it all the way. You're going to see all the sex, all the blood, all the viscera, and all the nudity and all that. Tony Scott, when he shows nudity, it's very quick. It's very it's meant for more of a scene.
Right.
Like in Beverly Hills Cop 2, you know, they go to a strip club. Of course, you have to show nudity, but it's very brief. Where he shows a lot of restraint than a lot of his contemporaries.
Yeah, I mean, he's English.
Yeah, I think that's got a lot to do with it. Yeah, and it was interesting they brought him in for Beverly Hills Cop 2, because if you look at the brief directing career of Martin Brest, who directed Beverly Hills Cop 1, that guy just made nothing but monster movies in Gigli.
Huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Like Sensible Woman and Meet Joe Black and Beverly Hills Cop 1, that's crazy. Midnight Run, yeah, like he made like 7 movies and they're all monsters, and then he made Gigli and then stopped, and I would too.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
But Beverly Hills Cop 2 felt like Beverly Hills Cop 1 had a baby with the movie Cobra. It was like the tone was so different from Beverly Hills Cop 1, but it still maintained all the... Eddie Murphy was the exact same character, but just everything tonally felt way different. It felt like such a departure from Beverly Hills Cop 1. It didn't occur to me till years later that someone else directed it.
Isn't that the story, though? That the script for Beverly Hills, like the Cobra reference you just made, isn't that the story? That it was the script for Cobra is originally the script for Beverly Hills Cop 1 or Beverly Hills Cop 2, and then after rewrite, it became Cobra?
Oh wow.
I didn't know that. That could be.
That makes a lot of sense now.
I believe that's the famous story. I thought it was Beverly Hills Cop 1, but maybe it's Beverly Hills Cop 2, but it's the original script for 1 was rewritten enough times that it became the other.
Ah, that's really interesting. It just felt tonally like Cobra to me. I didn't even know that. That's
really funny.
Yeah.
And Beverly Hills Cop 2 was pretty panned, but I thought he did a good enough job. It's still a funny film. It's Murphy at his best, and he went back to the well a lot as far, or kind of, not saying take the easy route, but no one could get in a car and drive from point A to point B without flipping over the car 8 times and knocking over 8 telephone poles. It was very much just kind of a trashy action film, for lack of a better term. But I thought it shouldn't have got as much heat as it did. I thought it was a competently made film and just a fine follow-up to Beverly Hills Cop.
Sometimes sequels just don't feel right. No one was necessarily begging for Beverly Hills Cop 2, but it was certainly better than Beverly Hills Cop 3, which wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to Jonathan Landis, but it was close.
Yeah, I've never seen that one. Never seen the third one.
See, and then we get into territory like, I think, I don't know if we said this off air or not, but Crimson Tide was just, God, that film, I think that's where the best display of tension, like that is... and that's where you really get the moral, ambiguous characters, right? You don't ever... You have multiple people to root for. And that's the same with True Romance, too, even though that was more Tarantino characters. But this film, it was like Marvel's or Captain America Civil War. There was a lot of people that could rationalize Gene Hackman's character and a lot of people with Denzel, and this would set up what Ben's alluding to, kind of the perfect marriage between filmmaker and actor. These two really worked well together. But no less, I think Gene Hackman, who is in everything, the man's 89 years old right now, he was in fantastic films. Really, he and Tony Scott really kind of figured each other out real quick as well.
That movie is really special. It's the perfect moment in Denzel's career. He's one of the actors, I think, that if you track his career as a film fan, you'll realize that he has distinctly 2 halves to his career. Yeah. And they are not at all... He's in no way the kind of guy where you've seen 3 or 4 of his first 10, and then you've seen 3 or 4 of his second. Like, you've probably seen all of the second half and 2 or 3 of the first ones for most people. Not for you guys, obviously. But, for all the... In the beginning... For every Malcolm X or Glory that he was in a million, Cry Freedoms and, The Pelican Brief and these movies that just have fallen. They just don't get referenced very much anymore. And so Crimson Tide, it comes at this perfect moment in his career where he's still on that Oscar path. He's still trying to get that Oscar, but he's not quite there yet. So, Training Day is where that's where it really goes into the next phase.
Training Day was a makeup Oscar.
Yeah, right, because he should have went for the Hurricane. But when Training Day happens is literally when he becomes Denzel the icon, no longer Denzel the actor. But Crimson Tide is the glimpse brief into that, or is the brief glimpse into that, where you watch him doing his thing there, and he's a total movie star, and he's working perfectly in this action genre with his director who totally gets him. And that movie is it's the best submarine movie. I like it more than Hunt for Red October. Yeah. I love the cast. It's got that great scene that they show in the trailer, which, by the way, if you guys are watching or listening to this and you haven't watched the trailer for Crimson Tide, go watch it, because it will give you 90s movie trailer chills. It's the best. It's like, it starts out with Hackman giving the speech in the rain or whatever about the USS Alabama. They scream, "Go Bama, roll Tide," and then you hear the drums or whatever, and then the 90s movie voice kicks in, and it's like, "What we've always known becomes what we've always feared." And it's just like what every 90s movie trailer is that movie trailer. So I can't get enough of that movie. It's one of my favorites.
I felt like that was when, as much as Denzel's career pivoted a little bit, I felt like that was when Tony's did a little bit too. Yeah. Because I felt like he took some risks with True Romance and stopped making other people's movies almost. Because at that point, it's sort of like he hit the second half of his career, and then he was making movies, with the exception of basically Domino, which felt very Richard Kelly. Everything else kind of felt like a Tony Scott movie at that point.
Totally agree.
Crimson Tide was a great pivot point because he made a tense, claustrophobic movie, and he's like, I like that tone, and he made a bunch more tense movies, and that was just fine with me.
Yeah, and aside from The Fan, I think after that you got Enemy of the State and Spy Game, Man on Fire, and then you get to, like you said, you get to Domino in 05. But those three right there, and I think Ben, you stated this before we hit record on this thing. That's Tony Scott's like perfect lineup, right? That is the Tony Scott films: is Enemy of the State, Spy Game, and Man on Fire. If you want to know what a true Tony Scott film feels like, even though, you know, Top Gun, True Romance, Crimson Tide, all are just absolute, you know, their greatness for different reasons, of course. But that is, if you want to say, hey, you're new to film or anything, what feels like a Tony Scott film? Well, put on Enemy of the State. That's pretty much everything that he's about.
Yeah, I guess The Fan didn't really fit with that ethos either. The Fan kind of felt like Major League had a baby with Cape Fear.
Felt like the worst version of a Fincher film. The Fan was just, yeah.
That's the De Niro one, right?
Yeah, the De Niro Wesley Snipes baseball fan one.
Yeah, okay. I've never watched that movie. That's one of the ones
you
that I've
should.
One of them. Oh, really?
Just to be a completionist? Why should he?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of movies to watch. If it comes up in Schmodown and I lose,
101 movies I missed. Add that to the list. No, I can't. I can't sanction that.
No, didn't it feel like the game or not? Well, yeah, The Game, right? That was the Fincher film, and it was
from '97.
Yeah, but the game was good.
The game was great. Yeah.
It's a little overrated at this point, but it's good. It's good.
Yeah, well, because a lot of the stuff that it did. A lot of stuff it pioneered became tropes later, so you're like, oh, they're doing this boring crap, but it started a lot of that stuff. Yeah, it's like comedians, you go back and like, oh, Jesus, Jerry Seinfeld's talking about airplane food. That's hack, but like it wasn't at the time.
Well, it's also like the Game exists in this. It's that movie. Most directors have this movie where they made two classics, and there's the one they make between.
Yeah.
And it's the Fincher movie between Seven and Fight Club. So like, what's it gonna do? You know, it's like it's never gonna be remembered that well. Yeah, always gonna be a little bit of a letdown.
Yeah, Enemy of the State, like it made me like Will Smith again for a second. I was like, oh yeah, this was and everyone's in it. The thing that I really liked about Enemy of the State is his choice, and I don't know how much of his choice this was or the casting director, but either way it happened where you had half serious actors. You had Jon Voight, you had Gene Hackman and all that, but then for as many serious actors that you had all these like 90s
Seth Green and Will Smith, yeah.
Jamie
Kennedy? Yeah. I was like, what are you doing?
Jason Lee, and like, is Scott Conn in that movie, or am I making that up?
Scott Conn is in the movie.
You had Gary Busey's son in there, and
Jake Busey.
Yeah, Jake
all
Busey.
Those '90s guys.
Billy Pepper or
Barry Pepper, the sniper from Saving Private Ryan.
I was just like,
that he made Battlefield Earth and then stopped making movies.
Well, we covered it on our show like a year or two ago. I love Enemy of the State. I saw that one in theaters with my dad, and it definitely exemplifies what a lot of like 90s action is about. You know, he became pretty synonymous with that genre, and that movie, it's got just all the right beats, and it's needlessly exciting at times. You know, it's like, I always remember it's tense and it's well done. I mean, that movie it's not one of his, I don't think it's his best. No. But I think it's a cohesive movie that feels very much like a Tony Scott movie, which is cool, that like all the stuff, like the time on the screen, and there's just like things that became very standard that he was doing. He used movie stars really well, and he uses Will Smith really well in that movie.
It was kind of the Armageddon to conspiracy theories Deep Impact at the time, where they just sort of like, here's the same movie again. And as much as it was the better film, I feel like it suffered just from the comparison.
Well, and as much praise as I gave it for having so many 90s comedians in there, it felt tonally messy as well.
There's so many voices. Yeah, that big shootout.
Yeah, and that felt like a Tarantino flick at the very end. I was like, that felt like Reservoir Dogs. So tonally, it was a serious movie, and then Will Smith's making a funny quip against Gabriel Byrne, who's in there for like 2 seconds. I
know that's how you're going to use Gabriel Byrne.
Just put him in a bathroom in a taxi cab. Yeah,
I know, he's barely in the movie. Well, so then it jumps to Spy Game, and like the funny thing about Spy Game is for all the good of Spy Game, because I think Spy Game is all right. Like, I think it's a good movie. It's mostly just remember the fact that it's Redford and Brad Pitt together in a movie. That's like mostly why that movie is memorable. Is like it was the point in Brad Pitt's career where he was super duper famous, and he's like the younger Robert Redford in a lot of ways. And so it's this. Again, it's like Enemy of the State and that movie are very similar in the sense that they're both above average, memorable cable movies. That are leading towards what I think is the defining movie in his career, which is Man on Fire, which is like, I think if you want to watch a movie that feels like Tony Scott,
sure, at
its core, it is Man on Fire. That's the movie.
Spy Game is a bit boring. There's a lot of, it feels very disjointed, but yeah, Man on Fire is where I feel like this is his third. This was Tony Scott's third act of his career.
Yeah.
In the beginning, it's kind of funny, quippy, kind of trashy. A lot of freeze frames. Every movie ended on a freeze frame, which I quite enjoyed in his early part of his career. And then you get the real serious stuff. And this is when he just kind of took. He really got involved in like the post, where he wanted to ramp up all the color grading. You get a lot of orange and teals, and you also get the hand crank. And this is where he started doing the frenetic. Over editing to some, but I think in this film, where a lot of them afterwards didn't work, I think this was kind of utilized the best.
Violent, and he does violence well. He ran into Denzel at a dentist office, and he hadn't seen him in like 7 or 8 years since Crimson Tide, and he had been working on the idea of redoing Man on Fire, because it's a Scott Glenn movie from the late 80s, and he pitched him in the dentist's office, and that's how this movie came about. And yeah, it's the relationship in this movie between Denzel and Dakota Fanning is what I'm talking about when I say he really cared about that stuff. And like, I probably watched this movie, I don't know, 5 or 6 times. And the scene on the bridge at the end when he saves her, and she's like, "I love you, Creasy Bear," or maybe he says it to her, and she says, "I know you do." It's one of them says it. Like, it gets me every time I watch that movie. It's just great, man. Like, that's an action movie. That's a great action movie. It's just Denzel, and he's this.
It has something for everybody, you know.
Yeah. It's cheesy too, right? Like, it's got a
bomb shoved up someone's ass. That's just if you like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, Walken's got the line where he's like, Creasy's an artist and his art is death, and he's about to paint his masterpiece. It's got lines like that where you're like, that's
Did
cheesy,
Steven Seagal write that?
but it's awesome, and it works. This movie's memorable.
And it feels like 2 different films too, because it does feel like that kind of odd buddy cop, even though that she's a little child and he's protecting her. But it's that back and forth, these two, this odd couple relationship, and then when it ramps up, it really ramps the F up and becomes a very competent revenge film. Better than most in the same genre.
It's almost like that movie every wrestler makes.
Right.
Where they pair him with a little girl. It's like The Rock and a little girl, or Dave Bautista and a little girl, or Hulk Hogan. It starts out like that. He's like, nah, I'm just going to have to shove some bombs up some asses now.
Yeah.
It's like pretty intense too, right? Like the scene, because I also love a lot of the relationship and character building stuff in this movie too. Like, I love when he's teaching her how to swim and get off the blocks quicker. And then when the gunshots start going off and he claps and she runs, like there are moments in this movie that work really, really well. And I actually think his style of editing works in this movie probably better than it ever works.
It's kind of funny that we completely ignored the movie Revenge, the Kevin Costner movie, just because it's so unmemorable. But
yeah, it's like that's like Costner. It's like Costner, like I think the same year or like year after he does Field of Dreams, but it's like the same year as Dances with Wolves.
Yeah,
so it's like he has this amazing trio, but it's just like lost in there.
It was 90, 91 sort of a deal. So yeah, that was right around Dances with Wolves, and it was just sort of a forgettable movie. But like, it was sort of almost like his first draft of all the Denzel stuff he did, because he liked the idea of like a revenge movie, but it wasn't until Man on Fire that he really executed it well.
Well, we start with Man on Fire, down this path here that I'm excited to talk about for a few minutes, which is the Denzel catalog. And like, while Crimson Tide is a great representation of the beginnings of that, it's the last 4 that are really like the movies, because it's this noble savage character that he likes to have in play. It's this ultimately flawed ultimately flawed, but sort of like morally sound character. And Denzel exemplified that better than I think any actor. He is the everyman hero in this extremely charismatic and likable way, while still feeling like an action hero. He feels like this relatable action hero, and he doesn't have stupid one-liners like in Die Hard. He's just that's why even when he's an MTA operator in the taking Pelham 123, he still feels sort of heroic and charismatic and likable.
Man on Fire, his character in that is just like incredible. You have this guy that's just been through literal hell, which they don't spell out too. Which that's a very underrated theme that Tony Scott employs, is the show don't tell. He shows a lot, and he trusts the audience enough to kind of fill in the blanks. Yes, you get a little bit of exposition, and sometimes cringeworthy exposition, like you stated with Christopher Walken's. You had to kind of tie that up with a nice, pretty bow. This is just a broken individual. He's literally been through the ringer. He's constantly drinking Jack Daniels, and he's just so mean to this child at first, but that just makes the arc so much better, and that rings true in the other offerings down the road. Is these redemption? He does redemption better than a lot of other filmmakers that I've seen.
Exactly right, redemption. I mean, and yeah, there's just a lot of memorable moments in Man on Fire. Him with the bandage getting in the pool, the blood coming out. Lots of shots in that movie that always.
And that was that double exposure thing that he would over employ in like a Domino, where it just felt like a hangover migraine. But in this, like where he has those images of her, it just really shows you. It shows the audience what Denzel is feeling. Rather than having to, you're seeing all the shots through his eyes rather than him talking to someone. Like in Top Gun, you literally have someone, a newscaster, telling the story. Kind of catching us up and why everything's relevant. Or I don't know if that was actually that might have been Crimson Tide. But either way, you don't have those awkward exposition scenes. He fills those in with a more riveting piece of art.
So I think we all can agree that skipping over Domino is a smart decision.
Well, it felt a little too Richard Kelly,
Yeah.
It tried to be a little too clever for its own good, but it was just like a waste of Tom Waits.
But here's the thing, and I'll get off my high horse as far like I feel like I'm being an apologist for him a little bit, but I feel like it's a little bit warranted because a lot of other of his contemporaries make just schlock, right? But then I feel like Tony Scott, even with a schlocky film like Domino, which is borderline unwatchable, I almost turned it off a bunch of times because the dialogue is just so bad, and it's just.
I'm impressed you didn't.
Man, it was rough. When you make Mickey Rourke look like an amateur, that's a feat. However, you could tell that he was really trying. He was really trying to be a groundbreaking visual artist in this film, and even in his missteps, he still put in enough effort, or the same amount of effort as his masterpieces.
Right. Yeah. I mean, he swung for the fences. I mean, and so. His last three films, other than Domino, are these three Denzel movies, back to back to back.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't call any one of them a well-received film. I think Unstoppable is the closest thing to being well-received.
I don't know why.
Unstoppable? Yeah, I actually like all three of these movies, which is funny.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I can come up with reasons why each one of these movies is watchable for me. But my favorite of the three of them, absurdly enough, is the Taking of Pelham 123.
Okay.
Well, I'm glad it's not Deja Vu because
I adore Deja Vu. I mean, I honestly, if you were to ask me my 5 favorite Denzel movies, I think like this is 3 of them. I'm not kidding. It's probably not true. It's probably not the 5.
It's fine.
Movies.
Like Denzel's fine in Deja Vu. It's just that movie just really gets out of hand quickly, right?
Well, yeah, the second half's really bad.
It's a Black Mirror episode. That's what it was.
Yeah.
A little bit.
But so we'll start with Deja Vu then. So great example of like when I talk about he goes for it with his characters, like that moment when he meets her dad and he's showing him the pictures, and as he's leaving, he's like, you should take these pictures, and he's like, I'm good, and he says, no, she has to matter to you, Officer Carlin. I know how these things work. That's the kind of stuff where I think Tony Scott had like such an awareness of what would make his characters tick. Like that's like this quiet, weird, like almost like haunting moment with his character that he's fallen in love with as he's investigating the murder. And it's those little moments that always stick with me in his movies, and I love that. I love like when Bruce Greenwood is talking to Val Kilmer after they first met Denzel, and he's like, "What do you think of him?" He's like, "I like him," and Greenwood's like, "Yeah, I do too." And then like the scene moves on, and like there are these real like little matter of fact moments that he likes to use, single lines, single looks. They work really well, and they are better than a lot of the action in these movies. So. I think the first hour of Deja Vu is really strong, actually, and I think they handle him falling in love with her through the investigation really well. It's the second half that starts to get absurd when he goes back in time. That's the stuff that's not as good. But
it's a PG-13 movie too,
right?
So like how much can you really? Yeah.
I do like Jim Caviezel in that movie, though. I think he's pretty creepy.
I don't like Jim Caviezel in much, and I liked him in this. Sure.
You know, what's his line? The tree of freedom has to be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots. It's a good line.
It was and that's why I felt, I think betrayed is a strong word, but because it did start off really strong. It was a very interesting premise. It was shot really well. It felt vintage Tony Scott, but vintage of good Tony Scott around that time. Like, oh, I am in for something special, and then just like. The ancillary wheels fall off, and it feels like a parody of itself.
The second half was a bad source code.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It does worse what later movies do better. I will tell you this though: if you guys are watching this and you want to watch a scene that just should make it clear to you what movie star Denzel Washington looks like, go watch like almost any of the scenes of him as a cop in this movie. This is where he starts to just fully be. I'm kind of out of shape. I'm in like a Hawaiian shirt, and I'm walking in slow motion with sunglasses on, and I look like the coolest dude that's ever lived. Like it doesn't, or him walking into the police station and saying to the cops, like, he's like, "Who's in charge here?" And the guy's like, "Oh," he's like, "Well, where's the coffee pot?" He's like, "He knows what the coffee pot is. He's in charge here." Like you're like, only Denzel could make that sound so cool. If I tried to walk in a room and be that cool, I would sound.
Any
like
white actor there'd be like, "Who is this douchebag?"
Yeah, but he comes in talking about the coffee pot. And you're like, this guy's the coolest guy that's ever.
He's trying to be Alec Baldwin from,
Yeah, Glengarry.
There you go. I like how he gave him little quips too, and maybe that was just Denzel because of the comfort level of working together for so much. But he had that weird like nervous laughter in this film, which was kind of different and kind of cool. And you're just like, that was some kind of weird choice. And I mean. Tony Scott seems like he sprinkled a lot of that just kind of, okay, in Top Gun, everyone's going to be really sweaty. Like really sweaty. Everyone is so moist in that film that you want to get in a tank top. But he has those or like True Romance, everything is super smoky. Like it looks like someone just smoked 8 packs of cigarettes.
Right.
Which is just so Tony Scott, right? He's just like, I'm just going to do this to add this thing in the background.
That's a painter's move.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So then speaking quickly about the last two, because I know we don't have that much more time here, and these movies are probably not the fan favorites, but I do love these.
Sure.
Taking a Pelham 1, 2, 3 is the one that I've referenced the most.
That's another remake, right? That he did too.
Yeah, it's another remake, and I guess maybe I'll talk Unstoppable first because Pelham's my favorite, so I'll explain why in a second, but. Unstoppable
of the two train movies.
I know, back to back, right? Unstoppable for me is that movie where it feels like at the point he makes Unstoppable that you're in such competent, capable hands as an action director that there's no way this movie won't be at least entertaining. Like that's what that movie feels like when I'm watching it. As the train starts to take off and he's starting to set you up, and you're like, oh, this is gonna like all the beats they need to hit. There's a missile, and there's a train, and it's the size of the Chrysler Building. You're like, oh my god, it's so crazy. Things are gonna get insane. And like, again, he's that same flawed character. He's a veteran, and he's having fun with Chris Pine. He's getting to know him, and like making fun of him for being young. It's so cliche in so many ways. He's got the line when he's on the horn with Kevin Dunn. He's like, so you're telling me you're gonna risk your life, for me after giving your notice 2 weeks ago? And Denzel's like, not doing it for you. And you're like, God, you're so noble. It's just like, he's where like it feels like the SNL sketch that makes fun of that movie is actually what the movie is. But if you're that action movie fan who likes the cheese sometimes, scenes like that still land is the weird part. Like that scene when I watched it again like a couple years ago, that scene still hit me because I was like, Denzel's just really good. Like he's just a really good actor, and he sells that scene.
I think what Tony Scott does well is PG-13, because the stuff that you have to juice up to make a PG-13 movie exciting enough for people to go see, it's nothing you could juice up in an R-rated movie. So he's got to crank some of that cheese up to 11 just because like that's the only knob you have to play with.
Right.
But he does that so well, that he makes PG-13 movies, watchable.
Totally agree. And so then you jump from Unstoppable into Pelham, which admittedly Pelham 1, 2, 3 is probably, I would argue, most people's least favorite of the 5 Denzel movies. People usually hate that movie. They usually think it's pretty bad. I like it for 2 reasons. One of which is I think John Travolta's character is absurd. I think he takes a total chance, and it's laughable and ridiculous and just somehow works.
He's full on Nick Cage at this point in that film.
He's done a ridiculous character basically since Punisher.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Totally agree.
Caricatures. Yeah, absolutely.
But I adore Denzel's character in this movie, Officer Garver. And there's 2 scenes in particular, but the one that always gets me is when he's on the phone and Travolta realizes that he's the guy that took this bribe, and he's going to get him to admit that he took it on air on the radio while everyone's listening. And Denzel's insisting he's not going to take it, and that he didn't take it. And he's like, if you don't tell me how you did it, I'm going to shoot this kid in the head right here. And finally Denzel's like, okay, I took the bribe, and it's like everything stops for a second. And it shows the guys that have worked with Denzel's character for 20 years, and the looks on their faces like, oh, this guy's been lying to us all along. And he starts to tell the story. He's like, I have 2 daughters, two daughters in high school, and I use the money to pay for their college. And again, you're like, oh, you're so noble. Because like that's what Tony Scott wants to beat you over the head with those beats of this character, but like because Denzel's such a talented actor, he sells a cliche better than anyone sells a cliche. And so when the final line, pause and Travolta's talking to him, he's like, Garber, you're my goddamn hero, man. And you're like, it's so cheesy, but I'm bought in now, so I like it. I'm into this. And when I watch that movie, I'm always struck by like, it's a weird performance for Travolta. It's not the best. There's a lot about this movie that doesn't work, but the fucking biggest movie star, Denzel Washington, makes it work. He sells it. It's just by like, it is the fact that Tony Scott can utilize his movie star charisma better than I think anyone else out there. And you watch Antoine Fuqua left and right try to do the exact same thing, and he doesn't use it as well because he's not as good a director. He doesn't understand how to direct the scenes between the action. Tony Scott got it. He just understood how to use Denzel in this way that made him the most likable icon that's like ever lived.
Well, and Denzel could bring an authenticity to. He can make cheesy lines seem deep and meaningful, unlike a lot of other performers out there.
Yeah. Totally agree, man. Because later in the movie, when he's on the phone with his wife, he thinks it's the last time he's going to talk to her, and he's like, "You tell our daughter tomorrow and at the track to go straight at the hurdles." And she's like, "Well, you need to come home because we need milk." And she's like, "Can you get a gallon?" He's like, "I can't get a gallon. I can get a half gallon." And you're like, "Why are you saying this?" But somehow it works. I'm so engaged in the realness of this interaction. All right, I'm done talking about those movies. I love them so much.
Well, it's kind of eerie, too, because, and we can't not talk about it because this is more about the filmmaker than the films themselves. And
we're going to talk about how he basically scouted the location of his own suicide on a movie shoot?
Yeah, a little bit. But it's not just in Deja Vu because, I mean, that is just like blatant. That is the bridge, for whoever doesn't know, Tony Scott committed suicide by jumping off a bridge in California, and it's the same one that you see in Deja Vu, where Denzel is literally like testing it and hanging off the bottom. So that's very telling. But it's not just like the obvious signs. He had in all of his films, he has this pass the baton kind of closure in a lot of these movies, all the way back to Tom Cruise throwing Goose's dog tags in the ocean. There is this certain sense of I've accomplished this thing, or I've made something right, or I've reached a pinnacle, and that's it. Whether that be a closure by death or retirement or just moving on as a chapter in your life or death. I think that's very telling. And a lot of people, Ridley Scott, his brother, came out and said he was suffering from cancer, but then there was a lot of reports that wasn't the truth, so that maybe there was some kind of depression. No one knows except the people, like his family, that actually read the note as to why. But I feel like he was kind of forthcoming. Like, a lot of his films are his moving on to a different life kind of moment, if you just kind of sit there and really look deep into him. So it's bizarre because a lot of the people around him, people that worked with him, like Denzel or Tom Cruise, like he and Tom Cruise days before were mapping out locations and story beats for Top Gun 2. And Denzel talked to him a couple days before as well, talking about, he said that Tony Scott was very excited, just giddy about his new projects. And of course, working with his muse Denzel again was really making him happy at the time. But that's why everyone was so shocked with what has happened. So I don't know. It's in an eerie way, you could really see the roadmap to his own demise. But it was almost poetic in a romantic way, if something like a tragedy like that can be.
A friend of mine, a writer who I won't name, had met with him maybe a month before he passed, and they were talking about doing a remake of The Warriors, and they had gone out together looking at locations, and it's a crazy coincidence that Deja Vu, same one, but they had gone to that bridge. That was one of the locations they had looked at, talking about concepts for the film. So it same sort of thing. When I heard that story, now I met him after Tony had passed, so this wasn't like I knew him then, but it was a story he told me when I told him how big of a fan I was. So I know that there's a lot of stories like that out there, that he seemed somewhat spur of the moment. So really, really sad.
Just talk about his body of work in general. He was, for the most part, critically panned. He got a couple of like Oscar nods for stuff that they didn't win, and it was never like best director or anything. But where do you guys think where's his place in the greater pantheon of filmmaking, and especially in the action film genre?
You said above average, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did, or you did.
Didn't we both?
Yeah, that's always how I viewed him. If he wasn't so critically panned, he probably wouldn't be such an interesting director to me. But again, it's not just a question of like, you get put with movie stars and you make movie star movies. Lots of directors do that. There's journeyman directors all the time that direct forgettable movies. I always will reference the 5 Denzel movies because you can see that he had such an idea of the kind of style and film and tone he wanted to create with those movies, and he did it. So to me, I'll always look at the best moments of those movies as the best embodiment of what he was about, which is he was an action movie director with true style. A lot of them don't have style. A lot of them just direct what's on the page. And it's truly rare. There's not that many that have a vision of how to make a movie where when you watch it, it feels like they are an artist. He was an artist. He just happened to make blockbuster movies, and explosions and big action movies are often critically panned. It's very hard to get one that's reviewed well.
I think we covered it.
Just any closing thoughts on him? Like I said before, like Jason, you and I talk about filmmakers all the time, and a lot of the time we're talking about usually like the trifecta of filmmakers that not only write but produce and direct as well. Where Tony Scott is a great, or he was a great helm person for other people's work. But I think that where before I would probably say, oh, well, he didn't write and he didn't do this or that. But I think it really gave him a chance to narrow in and focus on the craft of directing. And I think that every single scene that a Tony Scott film is on purpose, and it's just directed well as far as performances go, even though the dialogue isn't always great. A lot of the times it isn't. But it never feels like a wasted shot in a Tony Scott film. And I think that attributes a lot to, of course, his artistic background, but also the fact that he could really just focus on one specific aspect of the filmmaking process.
I feel like he had 3 distinct parts of his career. And in the beginning, I think he made a lot of movies for douchebags. And that's kind of hard to dissociate myself from. I think the third act was cut a little bit short because I think he was really making kind of really acceptable, exciting PG-13 movies with Denzel that people wanted to see, and I would have liked some more of that. And his life and career ended a little too soon, but I think real early, people don't think of, when they say Tony Scott, they don't think, oh, the guy that did Deja Vu. Everyone's like, oh, the Top Gun guy.
Right.
And it's hard to separate him from like the most iconic movies he made, and those didn't feel like Tony Scott movies. So he called himself a plagiarist, and I think that was being a little bit harsh, but also it sort of reflects how he felt about the movie he was making early in his career. And I feel like he only made a handful of films that were his style, which I think was unfortunate. So he had a lot of different Tony Scotts out there, sort of, and I didn't like all of them, but overall, I think he found his voice toward the end of his career, and good for him.
Yeah, it's the last piece that I'll always remember. So, rest in peace, man. I've asked actors and directors and people over the years that I've talked to about their roles in his movies, various times. Their roles working with him, because I'm always fascinated by just trying to understand more how he worked, and he's somebody that I hope to, as my career continues, to be able to talk to more people about. I remember talking to Radha Mitchell about Man on Fire at one point, something I did with her, and she had very kind things to say. And I've never interviewed Ridley Scott, but if I ever get to, I would hope to come up with an intelligent question reflecting on his brother's career, because I think it would be interesting to hear him talk about it.
Absolutely. So that is this discussion on director Tony Scott.
You could have saved it and been like actors director Tony Scott.
Actors director. Man, I'll get better at this one day, or probably not. But let's go around the horn. First off, I want to thank very special guest Ben Bateman from Action Industries. You want to tell everyone kind of about that new project, and just where to find you. And again, thank you so much for joining us again.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for writing me back. I appreciate it. You guys can see me, handful of times a year on the Movie Trivia Schmodown, competing as Ben the Boss Bateman. It's it's like movie trivia meets wrestling, sort of, without really the hitting. Though there is hitting, which not all the time. But
I didn't call you the boss this time.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. It's good. That's good. That's better. I do this stuff on a YouTube channel called Action Industries, where Andrew Guy, my partner in crime on the various shows we've done, a show for Collider called The Action Guys, and Action Movie Anatomy on the Popcorn Talk Network. We're now doing content on our own. So the full video versions of The Action Guys you can find over there. We're doing these live streams a few times a week, and we have this full team of people working with us over at Action Industries trying to build the project up, and news articles on the Instagram every day, and the Twitter's very active. So just constantly trying to put out as much content as possible there, and build the brand bigger and bigger, because we have big ideas of things we want to do. So go check it out. Like, subscribe, comment on Action Industries, and thanks for having me, guys. You guys can find me personally at Ben Bateman Media on social everywhere.
Yeah, the channel is a ton of fun. Please go and head over there, hit the subscribe button. Jason Elliott Alt, where can everyone find you, sir?
I am Jason E. Alt on the Twitter, and on the Twitter there is a pin post which has all the stuff I like to do. I've got various Magic the Gathering projects. I do this, and I wear a lot of hats, do some stand-up comedy, a little bit of writing, and I talk about movies. And I love doing it. Thanks so much for coming back and joining us. Check me out, Jason E. Alt on Twitter.
Perfect. And if you would like to listen to this exclusively or listen to this in podcast form, rather, you could do so on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, all that good stuff under Director's Cut. You could also thumbs up this video, subscribe to the channel, we said, for the various other movie projects we have going on here, as well as Magic the Gathering projects as well. You can find me personally, Jon Dunning, at OrzovDunn on Twitter. But until next time, moviegoers, we'll see you at the movies, see you at the cinema. One day, Jason, we'll get a good call off or sign off for this.
Not today.
But not today.